Hello and welcome to the Srimad Bhagavatam. Today we're on the last part of Canto 1 and on chapter 18 and 19. For those of you that have been following along, I really appreciate you being here. There's a lot to learn in the Bhagavatam, and it's all accompanied by narratives of a historical nature from an ancient time. And along with that narrative come great lessons. I hope that in our present time too, that we would learn the lessons of the past so that we don't repeat them, right? That's what history is all about. And these are the histories of the Puranas, the ancient times, times before history was even recorded by the modern day Western historians who would like to write their own version of history. But this is a history that they certainly will not accept because it is not their version. It is the version of great sages and of great wise people that lived thousands of years ago who recorded the events of that time in the Puranas, which you find are part of the Vedas. The Veda means knowledge. And so this Srimad Bhagavatam is the ultimate Veda, the final Veda that was written by Vyas. And today we're going to learn more about perhaps the most important thing that a human being needs to learn, and that is the purpose of human life. If you were to ask most people what is the purpose of their life, they might tell you that their life purpose was about being able to have a certain quality of life, maybe a certain lifestyle. And for that lifestyle, that quality of life, they would need to have certain things, maybe a nice house, a car, maybe a nicer car, maybe, a nice big TV and a bunch of kids and, a white picket fence and so on and so forth, however dreams are made of. And then we come into this world of desires, and in all those desires, there are thousands of them. The great poet Ghalib sang, or wrote rather in his poetry, Hazaro khwaishein aisi ke har khwaish pe dam nikle. That means that there are thousands of desires that we have, and on every desire, our entire life energy is spent and wasted trying to accumulate those desires and fulfill them. And it's true, we go to work, and there was a bumper sticker that said, I owe, and off to work I go. So it's kind of the fate of humanity that we start off with wanting survival, but then, once our survival needs are met, now we don't want comfort. And once our comfort needs are met, well, we want to look good and we want everyone to be impressed by what we have, our house and the place we live and the things we possess. And if they're impressed by us, and of course the vacations we take, which we can show off on Facebook, and Instagram, wherever you are on your social media, so that people can look at your life and say, oh my God, they're having such a great life. Oh, I wish I was having that too. And so everybody else is inspired from that to be able to race after the same things or more. But really, where's this coming from? If you think deeply about it, it's coming from the ego. The ego, of course, at the basic level, we need to survive. That goes without a given, all right? We all need to be able to survive. But beyond that, it's been shown that beyond a certain level of income, no matter how big your house is, no matter how fancy your car is, no matter how many vacations you take, the level of happiness doesn't go up. It doesn't. If you're a millionaire or a billionaire, it doesn't make a difference. Your level of happiness is not going to go up. The level of happiness between a person who's starving and a person who has their needs met definitely goes up. So yes, we know that is important. But The rest of it is about the ego wanting to prove that I'm good enough, I am valid, I am important, I am significant, I am as good as you, I am better than you, I am the greatest, I am the best, depends on how far you want to take it, right? There is no limit to where the ego can go. And if we keep remaining as servants of our ego, it will take us on a joyride that will not bring much joy. So it's important for us to understand that that kind of egoic drive isn't helping us. So, well, what else could there be? Some people look beyond these material aspirations and they say, well, I just want to help make the world a better place. Now, I know I fell into that trap too. I used to think, people have all these, even if you have a big house and you have all these things of the world, eventually you're going to die and leave it all behind. So what's the point of it all? This I was saying as a teenager, and my parents and everybody around me thought I was nuts. So I don't know if you've had that, but if you have, please write it in the comments. I'd love to know what your story is and how you kind of realized that there had to be more to life. Anyway, so we get onto this path of wanting to make the world a better place, and some of us become healers and others become psychics, and some people walk the spiritual path and others try to do things that might help people by, let's say, acts of charity or volunteering or whatever else they can get their hands upon. But ultimately, we realize that all of that isn't really solving life's problems. We can help, yes, but the world isn't becoming a better place. The essential myth behind that idea is that somehow we can alleviate suffering. And you really have to ask yourself, has anyone been able to do that? Great personalities have walked this earth. From Krishna to Buddha to Christ, yes, they have definitely given us great wisdom to live by. And some of us have tried to follow in their footsteps, though it's not easy. But what happens if you can't alleviate suffering? What happens if suffering is an intrinsic part of this world and everybody goes through it? Well, then what do you make of that? Well, some might say, all this suffering, there are lessons to be learned. All right, great. What is the ultimate lesson, I would ask them? Don't just look at the next lesson, but what is the ultimate lesson? And some would answer, at least in the words of many of the great teachers that have lived here, that the ultimate would be to be free from suffering altogether. And if you want to take it one step higher, to become free from death, to become free from the human condition of life. And that means to basically go beyond this realm of consciousness, which is where we are now, into a higher realm of consciousness that some would call the light and others would call heaven. It doesn't really matter which way they want to look at it. But bottom line of all of this is there are different levels of life purpose. We need to choose what is the life purpose that you want from your life. And what do you think is the ultimate life purpose? If you are satisfied with the status quo and chasing after the things that everybody else is chasing after, well, this might not be the best place for you to be. But if you are looking for something beyond that, if you're looking at really being able to become, you see, before you go out and try to show other people how to rise beyond suffering, you need to experience and learn that for yourself. And live that and be the embodiment of that so that you can share it with other people. I'm not saying I am free from suffering. I certainly experience suffering as all of us do. But the path to freedom is clear. And the experiences that are helping overcome the usual suffering that most people have has been starting to develop and has come a long way. There's more to go. But here's what it really comes down to. Sufferings are basically of three kinds. Sufferings that are caused by oneself, that is your body, mind, right? So for most people, this is where suffering is. The body causes you a certain amount of suffering, such as disease, such as aging, and the mind causes us suffering. And that is consistent, persistent, and pervasive. It is always there. The mind is constantly nagging away at us, criticizing us, judging us, telling us all kinds of things. And we suffer as a result. So that is ati bhautik. Then there is suffering caused by other people, right? People who might make fun of you, criticize you, people who are not of your race or gender or whatever, and who might, or of your people at work, and so many situations where other people become the cause of suffering for you. And then finally, there is the suffering that is caused by nature, adi atmik, adi bhautik, and adi devik. So adi devik is that which is caused by nature, and that is, of course, extreme heat, extreme cold. Of course, when it rains a lot, whenever you have extreme conditions, again, we suffer. Some people lose their houses, some people lose their cars, and some people lose their lives when there are these extreme weather conditions. It could be a volcano that goes off, it could be a tsunami that erupts. So many things that can happen and that make life extremely uncertain, and it make it difficult to navigate life while still being peaceful and calm. So the purpose of this Bhagavatam is actually to help us get to that place of peace and calm, so that we become like this large ship going through the ocean, unaffected by the waves. That is the aim. Or to become sthir, to become steady, to become unfazed by life. And for this end, the Bhagavatam presents us the path. That path is not just taught to you in terms of theory, but is also taught in terms of practical application. So we learn of the ways of different wise and saintly people, highly evolved beings ranging from kings to saints, and how they live their life, so that they can be an example for us on how to live ours. So if that's something you'd like to learn about, let's get into the Bhagavatam. And for today we're on chapter 18, how King Parikshit was cursed by a Brahmin boy. Oops. Okay. Guess that didn't work out so well. All right, so Parikshit was a very famous king. We've been talking about him in the previous episodes of the Bhagavatam. And he had now become the king of what was the known world at that time. And ever since Sri Krishna had disappeared from the world 5,000 years ago, the age of Kali had begun. The age that we live in right now. This is known as the age of quarrel, hypocrisy, dissension. Right? This is an age in which we see people's duration of life decreasing. We see suffering increasing day by day. Now, of course, we've become very smart and really capable at reducing that suffering, and that can be through various inventions that we've made, ranging from the automobile to the air conditioner to all light, electricity, and so many things that we've done in the area of medicine as well. All of that is amazing, but what it's really trying to do is keep up with the pace at which this age is going on, throwing newer and newer things at us. There was a time where we had COVID now, and then in the past we had various other things, ranging from the Spanish flu way back to other viruses like AIDS, and we've had polio, and we've had smallpox, and we've had so many different things, and they have killed literally thousands or tens of thousands of people, and we've been struggling to deal with them. And we're getting better and better, no doubt, but it's the age that we live in, the time that we live in, where everything is going more and more and more towards chaos. We can observe this. It's not something I want to claim. It's just scientists are talking about it as well. So it says here that when Krishna left this world, Krishna is the supreme being, the supreme Godhead, who had incarnated 5,000 years ago and presented to us his Leela, his pastimes. And we've been talking about this. If you're new here, please try and catch up on the earlier things that we've been doing. So when he left this world, the age of Kali, this present time that we live in, began. But Kali was stopped, as we learned last week, by King Parikshit. and was not allowed to flourish. Now the king, Parikshit, was a realist. Like the bees, it says here, like the bees who only accept the essence of a flower, he knew perfectly well that in this age of Kali, auspicious things produce good effects immediately, whereas inauspicious acts must be actually performed to render effects. So what that means is that if you think about good things in this life, you will, in this time, you will get the benefit of that very quickly. So for the good, for the positive, there is very rapid growth, while at the same time, the negative is all around you. Inauspicious acts that are performed, you'll need to perform them. So just by thinking of something bad, you don't get bad karma in this time. You have to actually do it. But there is a great deal of opportunity to be able to do things that are actually harmful for you spiritually and karmically. For example, if you're in the pursuit of great wealth and egoic advancement, as in, wanting to look better, wanting to be the best, and so on and so forth, you're likely to then be competitive. And what that often means is trying to be better than others, maybe put them down, maybe, find fault with them. If you're going to become the prime minister of some place or the president, you might have to might have to speak badly about your opponent. You might have to point out all their flaws and maybe make some up to. Somehow or other, and this happens in corporations as well, as you climb the corporate ladder, people have to learn how to play with office politics. And it's all over. It's in families. In families, you see the same kind of, bitching, complaining, fault-finding, criticizing, all as a way for me to be right and you to be wrong. And it's a sad thing. Instead of being focused on that which is best in others and in ourselves, we focus on criticizing not only others, but also ourselves, being highly judgmental, thinking that will somehow help us, and it doesn't. So the king here, knowing these things perfectly well, focused on helping people in the way that would actually work. So here's what he did. He considered that less intelligent people might find the personality of Kali to be powerful, but that those who are self-controlled would have nothing to fear. So like a powerful tiger, he took care of the foolish and careless person. So there's lots of people in this world who are not spiritually driven, who will seek whatever it is that gives them the greatest pleasure and the most fun and all the things that make life exciting. Well, that's wonderful that they want to do that. But however, the path of hedonism, the path of self-indulgence, you can enjoy the best of foods and go to the most wonderful of places and all of that, is short-lived. I mean, you go on a holiday somewhere. Yes, you spend a week there, 2 weeks there, month, but then it's over and you're back to the grind. And once you're back, that's just a faint memory. Maybe you got some pictures or some videos, but that's about it. That hasn't solved the problem. A person who gets drunk on some alcohol or eats a good meal doesn't mean that his or her problems are solved. Those problems still remain. So you can forget about them for a night, but that doesn't stop them. It doesn't take away the very basic issue. So does that mean that someone who is spiritual doesn't have problems? Absolutely not. We have all the same problems that anybody else has. But because we've focused on learning how to tame the mind, because we've set our sights on something higher and something more profound and more divine, we experience a kind of peace in this world, an ability to cope with the stuff that life throws at us. And that's what we need. We need to be prepared. If you are not prepared, if you have no tools, if you have no ability to cope with the stuff that life throws you, it's like a person who's got no immunity in their body. And so then any illness can come and attack that body and make them sick. People who have good, you saw this during the time of COVID when people had low immunity due to pre-existing conditions. Let's say they had heart problems or they had whatever other issues, asthma, whatever. They became more susceptible to getting COVID and having more serious attacks. Those who were healthy and had a good immunity their body was able to fight back against the disease. And so it is with our minds. The more we've trained our mind, the less we suffer. The more we have gained a higher taste for spiritual things, the less the things of this world bother us, because we realize that there's more to life than all of this. And we have conditioned our mind to think differently. Makes all the difference in the world. So the question really is, how can one be free of the age of Kali, of this time that we now live in? And here's what I learned from the Bhagavatam. Those who are desirous of achieving complete perfection in life must, A, practice listening. So listening is what? Listening means observing the world, observing yourself, listening, not just to your mind, because that's probably the least thing to listen to, but to your heart, and listen to the deepest part of you, your soul. And through that soul, be able to listen to the words of the divine or God. Why? Because when you listen at that deeper level, that listening uplifts your consciousness. The more you listen to the mind, the lower your consciousness comes. The more you listen to the heart, and through that the soul, and through that to God, the higher your consciousness evolves. The more your consciousness evolves, say for example, you're in a meditation, or you're in a prayer thing, or you're singing kirtan, or engaging in any other kinds of, including listening to the Bhagavatam like this, you feel a sense of bliss that is coming. Why is that happening? Because a part of you, your soul, loves this stuff, thrives on it. It is food for the soul. And that food for the soul makes you feel joyous from within. So here's how the Bhagavatam puts it. Submissively hear all topics that are connected with the transcendental activities and qualities of the personality of Godhead, who acts wonderfully. Now that's a concept that you will not find in most religions of the world that are caught up in an idea of God who punishes. Here the Bhagavatam talks about the activities and qualities of God which are wonderful. It actually, we go through understanding, well, what does God do? What does God look like? What does he do? What kind of, what does it mean to be with God? Why should I want to be with someone? Or why should I love someone? Like, for example, the Bible says to love God with all your heart, mind, and soul. So why would I want to love someone who I know nothing about? Right? And why would I want to love someone who is fearful? And why would I be interested in hearing about somebody whose life is boring? They sit on a throne and they just sit there judging people all day long. That's not actually what God is. Unfortunately, some people kind of twisted things around a bit to create an understanding that perhaps helped them, but didn't help the cause of God. The Bhagavatam puts it very differently. It talks about God as this wonderful personality, God, Krishna, who is joyous and celebratory and dancing and singing and living life to the fullest and saying, hey, come join me. It's not about just doing it in the world, but it's really doing it with God. It doesn't mean you can't celebrate and you can't enjoy and you can't live your life. Absolutely. But have God in the center of that. Have Krishna there. And then it makes all the difference. So it says here, listening about the activities and pastimes of the Supreme Godhead, Krishna. The personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna or Govinda, is the exclusive shelter for all great living beings. And his transcendental attributes cannot even be measured by such masters of mystic powers as Shiva and Brahma. Can anyone who is expert in relishing nectar, rasa, ever be fully satiated by hearing topics about him? So even those who have tasted the highest nectar, what is the highest nectar? The nectar and bliss that arises from the soul. Even those who have relished this highest bliss of all, right? You've heard the soul is Sat Chit Ananda. It is eternal, full of knowledge and full of bliss. Even those who have tasted the bliss of the soul relish the nectar that comes by hearing of the pastimes of Sri Krishna, Govinda, and all his wonderful Leela and his activities. So it says here that his transcendental attributes cannot be measured by such masters of mystic power as Shiva and Brahma. How can anyone who is expert in relishing nectar or rasa ever be fully satiated by hearing topics about him? The second thing that is mentioned is association. Who do you associate with? Who are the people you hang out with? It makes a big difference in your life. The quote here is from the Bhagavatam is, the value of a moment's association with someone who is in love with God, a devotee of God, cannot even be compared to the attainment of heavenly planets or moksha, liberation from matter, or liberation from suffering. What to speak of worldly benedictions in the form of material prosperity, which are for those who are meant for death. In other words, the worldly prosperity only leads one way. It leads towards death. And what does death mean? You leave it all behind. When you leave it all behind, it's all been for nothing. Suddenly you realize, oh my God, I spent my whole life. You've left your body and you realize, oh, I spent my whole life working for something that I left behind anyway. I couldn't take it with me. What was the point of that? And then you have remorse, and then you try to come back here, and you try to do it again, and maybe you remember and maybe you forget. Maybe you still want to try again, give it another shot. And then come back to the same place where you die, and then you leave, and then you realize, oh, damn, I did it again. Bhagavatam continues. It says, even by conversing with such great souls, one can, without delay, cleanse oneself of all disqualification. So basically it says that when you are in the association of spiritually minded people, people who have devoted themselves to a higher cause or to God or to the divine, you will find that even being with them, associating with them, cleanses the heart and the soul. Self-controlled persons who are attached to the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna can all of a sudden give up the world of material attachment. Because that's one of the symptoms by which you know such a person, is that they're not interested in the stuff of this world. They might enjoy it, but it's not their goal. It's not their focus. It's not what they're about. O rishis. A rishi is a highly evolved being, a sadhu, a saintly person. O rishis, who are as powerful and pure as the sun, I shall try to describe to you the transcendental pastimes of Krishna and Vishnu. As far as my knowledge is concerned, as the birds fly in the sky as far as their capacity allows, so do the learned devotees describe the Lord as far as their realization allows. So he points out something very interesting. One can only tell you about the nature of God to the degree that they have evolved. They cannot tell you everything. No one can tell you everything that is to be known. No one. It is only to the degree that they have evolved that they can actually begin to give you some insight. One cannot give something that they do not have. So that's a really important piece to remember. And as a result of which, some people don't have much. Maybe some people even have a sort of broken, twisted understanding. Well, they'll give you what they've got. And if you don't like it, and if that's not your thing, you want more, then go for more. Be hungry, be greedy. This is the place to be greedy. When in inquiring about and wanting to learn about the divine or about God, this is where hunger needs to be, where your thirst needs to be, where your desire needs to be. To give me more, tell me more, tell me more. Let me take it all, let me drink it all in. So the Bhagavatam continues. King Parikshit, while engaged in hunting in the forest with bow and arrows, now the kings and warriors, they used to hunt. Nobody else was allowed to do that. Only warriors. And they too had very strict codes that they had to follow. There were no slaughterhouses, there was none of that stuff. This was part of they're the only ones, the warriors, are the only ones who used to eat meat. And that too, they had to hunt that meat. And there were no slaughterhouses for it. So they had to be able to, and that too, it had to be then in a very controlled way. So only the warriors. Others, because the rest of the world, people had to cultivate their spirituality, and meat makes you very aggressive. It makes you it's called the mode of passion, Rajogun. And when you engage in having that, it affects your consciousness. Not having it really helps if you're interested in having a meditative life. If you want to be able to calm your mind have a peaceful life and good health. It helps. I've seen for myself. I became vegetarian about 43 years ago, 44. And it has made a huge difference in my own consciousness and the ease with which I was able to step into a life of having a quiet mind and being peaceful and inwardly affecting, bringing about massive change in my life. So I've seen it work, and I can definitely attest to the fact that this system is legit. So now this king, Parikshit, while he was out hunting and he got hungry and thirsty, he was searching for a reservoir of water. And he entered into the hermitage of a rishi. A rishi, again, is a very saintly person, someone who's renowned, somebody who's given up the world and he's living in his hermitage. And this rishi was in meditation, in trance. And the king saw him sitting there silently with his eyes closed. And he was sitting on a deerskin, and he had long matted hair, and his sense organs, his breath, his mind and intelligence were all restrained from the external world. So he was like literally in a deep trance. Now the king, whose palate was dry from thirst, asked the rishi for water. Now, this is really strange behavior because the king would never normally have done that. But he did. Sometimes we do weird things that we would not normally do. And we sometimes behave completely out of character. This king knew better, but nevertheless something overtook him, as happens to us from time to time as well. And he tried to ask this sage for water. But the sage neither gave him any formal welcome, nor sweet words, or even a seat to sit down. So he didn't welcome him. Hey, king, you're a great guy. Come here, please sit. No, nothing. Didn't even look at him. And the king considered himself neglected. And so thinking, he became very angry. Who the heck does this guy think he is? He's just this arrogant, proud guy who thinks he's highly evolved and he's sitting in his meditation. He's probably just faking it. So his mind started going off. And distressed with extreme hunger and thirst, the king directed his anger towards the sage, something he had never done before and would never have ordinarily done. Then, realizing that the sage wasn't going to respond to him, the king, feeling insulted, picked up a lifeless snake with his bow and angrily placed it on the shoulder of the sage and then returned to his palace. Have you sometimes done that? Where you're mad at somebody and you say something insulting or you do something insulting as you're walking away from that place. Yeah, right, I'll show you. And then as the king returned, he began to contemplate and argue within himself. So have you had that happen? Like you've said something really mean and nasty to somebody, and now in your mind you're arguing within yourself. I should have said this and I shouldn't have said that. And oh my God, what if he's thinking this? And what if she's thinking that? And oh, what did I do? No, actually I did the right thing. I should have done even worse. Like that, our mind goes on, right? So he's arguing within himself whether the sage had actually been in meditation, with senses concentrated and eyes closed, or whether he had been feigning, pretending to be in trance just to avoid receiving him. That guy was probably a fake, the king's thinking. That guy was probably just a charlatan. Now this sage had a son who was also a very powerful Brahmin. Of course, he was not at the level of his father, which becomes evident in a few moments. We'll see that. But this kid, while he was playing with his friends, he heard of his father's distress and came running to see him. And when he saw what the king had done, the boy spoke as follows. Oh, just look at the sins of the rulers who are like crows and watchdogs at the door. They perpetrate sins against their masters contrary to the principles governing servants. Now this Brahmin, see, the Brahmins were considered the highest people in society, even above the kings. The Brahmins were the priests. And the priests were the ones who were engaged in teaching spirituality and worshipping the deity and all that. So some of them became very arrogant, as in the case of this boy. And it's clear from his words, you begin to see the arrogance he has. He continues, the descendants of the kingly order are definitely designated as watchdogs, and they must keep themselves at the door. On what grounds can dogs enter the house and claim to dine with the master on the same plate? Meaning, how dare this person have stepped into my father's house? My father is a great saintly person. My father is a rishi. The boy continues, after the departure of Krishna, Sri Krishna, the supreme ruler of everyone, these upstarts have flourished and our protector being gone. Therefore I myself shall take up this matter and punish them. Just witness my power. You see, when one practices spirituality, one gains great power. This power is known as siddhis. These siddhis would give a yogi tremendous ability to be able to have anything they want, be anywhere they want. It's just amazing the kind of abilities they would develop through their meditations. The boy is just in a total rage. Now, one of the signs of a highly evolved person is that they have conquered over lust, anger, and greed. But this boy certainly hadn't. He developed siddhis, and siddhis can be very dangerous in the wrong hands. It's like giving weapons to a country and not know, if the country has nuclear weapons and they don't know how, the rulers are unpredictable. Well, everybody lives in fear. They don't know when this ruler is going to try and throw a nuclear bomb at them. They have no idea. Some crazy fellow gets in there and it's going to be the death of millions of people. So the son of the rishi, there's the saintly guy who was in meditation, his eyes red hot with anger, touched the water of the river Kaushika while speaking to his playmates and discharged the following thunderbolt of words. The Brahmin's son cursed the king thus, on the 7th day from today, a snake bird will bite the most wretched one, King Parikshit, because of his having broken the laws of etiquette by insulting my father. Now, what's a snake bird? We'll come to that. But it is basically a snake which is able to fly and is able to will then come and kill the king. When? On the 7th day from today. So he's put a curse. Now, when these Brahmins would put a curse, it would actually happen. So the snake bird will bite the king because of his having broken the laws of etiquette by insulting my father. When the boy returned to the hermitage, he saw a snake on his father's shoulder, and out of his grief he cried very loudly. Sometimes we're very protective of our loved ones, and if you love your parents dearly, you certainly feel very sad if someone humiliates them and if someone mistreats them. So the rishi, saintly person, on hearing his son's cry, gradually opened his eyes and saw the dead snake around his neck. He threw the dead snake aside and asked his son why he was crying, whether anyone had done him any harm. On hearing this, the son explained to him what had happened. The father heard from his son that the king had been cursed, although he should never have been condemned, for he was the best amongst all human beings. Who? The king. The father did not congratulate his son, but on the contrary began to repent, saying, "Alas, what a great sinful act was performed by my son. He is awarded heavy punishment for an insignificant offense." "Oh, my boy," he said, "your intelligence is immature, and therefore you have no knowledge that the king, who is the best amongst human beings, is as good as God. He is never to be placed on an equal footing with common men. The citizens of the state live in prosperity, being protected by his unsurpassable prowess. My dear boy, God is represented by the king, and when his regime is abolished, the whole world becomes filled with thieves, who then at once vanquish the unprotected subjects like scattered lambs." Now, it's very important to notice, this is not about some ordinary king. We are referring to Rajarshis, Raja and Rishi. So you remember I was using the word Rishi for a highly evolved being, a saintly person? Well, when you have Raja, who's a king, and Rishi, so they're called Rajarshi, Raja and Rishi in one. A king and a saintly person in one. A highly evolved being who is there as king. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about these kings like we've had in present time. If you look at Henry VIII or you look at any of the other kind of kings we've had, mostly they were just about power-hungry, lecherous, greedy, nasty people. And so therefore everyone turned away from monarchy. But here we're talking about a great saintly king, Parikshit. The Rishi, the father, continued, Due to the termination of the monarchical regimes and the plundering of people's wealth by rogues and thieves, there will be great social disruptions. People will be killed and injured, and animals and women will be taken advantage of. And for all these sins we shall be responsible. Because he could see that Parikshit was what was holding back the advent of the age of Kali. And now his son had broken the dam and cursed Parikshit to die. At that time, the father continued, the people in general will fall systematically from the path of progressive civilization in respect to the qualitative engagements of the castes and orders of society in the Vedic injunctions. Thus, they will be more attracted to economic development for sense gratification. And that's where we're at today. Economic development for enjoyment of the senses, right? And as a result, there will be an unwanted population on this earth. And that's what we have. They were seeing this. They were clear that this is where we were headed. The Emperor Parikshit is a pious king. He is highly celebrated and is a first-class devotee of God. He is a saint amongst royalty, and he has performed many wonderful deeds. When such a king is tired and fatigued, being stricken with hunger and thirst, he does not at all deserve to be cursed. Then the rishi prayed for the all-pervading Supreme Godhead Krishna to pardon his immature boy who had no intelligence and who committed the great sin of cursing a person who was completely free from all sins, who was subordinate, and who deserved to be protected. The devotees of the Lord are so forbearing that even though they are defamed, cheated, cursed, disturbed, neglected, or even killed, they are never inclined to avenge themselves. This is a very important line here, and I'd love for you to really contemplate this. The true devotees of God are so forbearing. So forbearance is one of those qualities that is very fundamental to a person who is highly evolved. That even though they are defamed, cheated, cursed, disturbed, neglected, or even killed, they are never inclined to avenge themselves. You see this in the case of Christ. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. It's a fact. That is such a wonderful example of this, right? They do know not what they do. A highly evolved person actually sees and understands that people are not in their right senses. And so it's very important for all of us. You may have a friend, you may have a partner, you may have someone who calls you names, who puts you down, who cheats you, who curses. When you start to act at their level, now you have come to their level of consciousness and defamed yourself. You have lowered your level of consciousness. If you truly think you have evolved spiritually, then stay true to your heart and soul. It is the hardest thing to do. It is difficult. It's extremely difficult. And all I can say is that our struggle needs to be that no matter what anybody thinks of us, no matter whether they like us or they defame us, whether they judge us or they criticize us, whether they cheat us or they curse us, to remain undisturbed is our practice. I'm not saying it's going to happen overnight, but practice. Practice looking through the veil of your ego. Your ego is going to want you to retaliate. And what you need to be able to do is to notice that this person is also hurting. Right? As they say, the saying goes, hurt people hurt people. Right? So when they are themselves hurt, they themselves are hurting, that's when they go out hurting others. You'll see this in these school shootings that have taken place all over America for the last, 10, 20, 30 years, and so many of them. But it's usually kids who are really hurting. Kids who've been bullied, kids who've had a horrible life. Nobody goes out and shoots a bunch of people unless they themselves are deeply in anguish and misery. I'm not justifying their behavior, of course not. But I'm just trying to give you an insight into their psyche so you begin to understand that. Hating them, abusing them, isn't going to change them. It isn't going to make a difference to them. It's only going to bring you down. But the day you can actually empathize with them and look deeper into their heart and into their soul and the pain there, you may have a chance to be able to connect with them and maybe even find a way for them to come out of that. I can't say that'll happen, but if you're ever faced with a situation like that, it is more helpful to empathize and to step into their world and help them come out of there rather than to judge them and act the way they're acting. The sage thus regretted the sin committed by his own son. He did not take the insult paid by the king very seriously. Generally, the transcendentalists, even though engaged by others in the dualities of the material world, are not distressed. This is the symptom. See, when we are saying on this path, this is what we are aiming for. This is the example. He's not distressed. Nor does such a saintly person or highly evolved being take pleasure in worldly things, for they are transcendentally engaged. Now, it's an important piece to understand. How is one able to do this? The answer is this. At the level of the mind and the level of the ego, this is impossible. Let's be plain and simple. Let's speak it plainly for what it is. But at the level of the soul, this comes naturally. So, how does one get to the level of the soul? By the process of elevating one's consciousness. How does one do that? Through meditation, through chanting the names of God, through listening to the pastimes of God, to attend reading the Bhagavad Gita or the Bhagavatam or any other scripture of the world, because they will give you the inspiration to go deeper within yourself. The journey is about going within yourself. Finding that inner peace, finding that part of you which will then respond naturally in a very different way to the world than your mind and ego does. But if you don't make that hero's journey into the soul, you're going to find yourself constantly at the mercy of this mind and ego. And you'll say, it's not possible. These guys are just talking. It's just a bunch of crap. But there are thousands of people in ancient times who have been there. You have Christ as your example from the Abrahamic religions. But here in the Bhagavatam and the Vedas, you have thousands of examples of beings just like that, who do not care, who are not driven by their ego, but who are actually deeply situated within their soul and the love that pours out of there. So the next part now is chapter 19. I'm going to go into that as much as I can today. And this is about the appearance of Shukadev. So now the king is returning home, King Parikshit, and he feels that the act he had committed against this faultless and powerful Brahmin was heinous and uncivilized, and the king is feeling very distressed. And he's thinking, due to my neglecting the injunctions of God, I must certainly expect some difficulty to overcome me in the near future. He's expecting, he knows I've done something really wrong. We all do, right? When we do something bad or wrong, we hurt someone or we do something crazy, we know that karma is going to catch up with us. Maybe now, maybe later, but it always catches up with us. And the king is thinking now, he says, I now desire without reservation that the calamity may come now, for in this way I may be freed of karma and not commit such an offense again. I am uncivilized and sinful due to the neglect of Brahminical culture, God consciousness, and therefore I wish that my kingdom, strength and riches burn up immediately by the fire of the Brahmin's wrath, so that in the future I may not be guided by such inauspicious attitudes. He says, I'm willing to forsake everything I have, if that is the price I have to pay, because what I've done is unacceptable to me. While the king was thus repenting, he received news of his imminent death, which would be due to the bite of a snake bird, occasioned by the curse spoken by the sage's son. The king accepted this as good news, for it would be the cause of his indifference towards worldly things. He then sat down on the banks of the Ganga river, Ganges river that flows through India. He sat down on the banks of the Ganga to concentrate his mind on Krishna, because transcendental loving service to Krishna is the greatest achievement of life. The river Ganga carries the most auspicious water, which is mixed with the dust of the lotus feet of Krishna and therefore sanctifies the three worlds, including the demigods. Consequently, everyone who is destined to die must take shelter of this river. That means all of us. He decided, King Parikshit decided once and for all to sit on the banks of the river and fast until death and give himself up to the lotus feet of God, who alone is able to award liberation. So freeing himself from all kinds of associations and attachments, he accepted the vows of a sage. At that time, all the great minds and thinkers, accompanied by their disciples, so all the other saintly people, all the rishis and sadhus and highly evolved beings of that time, they got the message. They knew this time has come and they need to land up at that same place. So all the great minds and thinkers, accompanied by their disciples and sages who could verily sanctify a place of pilgrimage, means they themselves were so evolved that just being in their presence was as if you'd gone to a place of pilgrimage, as if you'd gone to a holy place. Each one of them was the embodiment of such divinity. They arrived there on the plea of making a pilgrim's journey. When they all assembled together to meet the emperor, he received them by bowing his head to the ground. So now remember that even though he was the emperor of the known world at that time, he bowed down before these saintly people. They were considered the highest level of evolution in society and not the person with the most money or the most power. Very different world than we live in now. Anyway, after they had seated themselves comfortably, the king, humbly standing before them with folded hands, told them of his decision to fast until death. The king said, "Due to my being too much attached to family life, God, in order to save me, has appeared before me in such a way that only out of fear, and that now that I'm afraid, I will detach myself from the world." I wasn't doing it earlier, but sometimes you know how fear comes in. Fear of death, fear of old age, fear of suffering comes in, and then we'd reach out to God. So he says, I've just been given the boot now, and I finally had to accept, I need to detach myself from the world. So he says, the king says to these saintly people, please accept me as a completely surrendered soul and let Mother Ganges, that is the river Ganges, the representative of God, also accept me in that way, for I have already taken the lotus feet of the Lord into my heart. Let the snake bird or whatever magical thing the Brahmin created bite me at once. I only desire that you all continue singing the deeds of Lord Vishnu, as in chanting the mantras and so on. I pray that if I should take my birth in this material world, I will have complete attachment to the unlimited Lord Krishna, an association with his devotees, and friendly relations with all living beings. Parikshit, the king, then sat down on a seat of straw facing the east on the banks of the Ganges, and as he sat there, he had given over the charge of his kingdom to his son. The assembled sages then praised his decision and said, "O chief among saintly kings, it is not at all astonishing that you give up your throne, which is decorated with the helmets of many kings, to achieve eternal association with God. We shall all wait here until you return to the spiritual world, which is completely free from all mundane contamination and all kinds of lamentation." The king thanked them and said, "O great sages, you have all very kindly assembled here, having come from all parts of the universe. You are all as good as the supreme knowledge personified, who resides in the planets above the three worlds, Satyalok. Consequently, you are naturally inclined to do good to others, but for this you have no interest either in this life or the next." So they're not attached to doing good. They're not attached to the fruits of their labor. They're not attached to being able to get something. What's in it for me? No, they just want to be able to serve humanity and give them whatever they have acquired spiritually. I now ask you about my immediate duty. Please, after proper deliberation, tell me if the unalloyed duty of everyone in all circumstances, and specifically of those who are just about to die. It's an important thing to realize here. Death can come to any of us. At any time, death can come to us. We never know when it will come, at which moment, how, when, where. And therefore the message of Parikshit is so important for all of us. He had notice that he will die in 7 days. We don't have notice. It could be next minute. It could be the next day. We don't know. And therefore we need to follow in his footsteps and prepare ourselves for the inevitable future. So he says, he's asking them to tell him, that what is it that I should do? After proper deliberation, tell me of the unalloyed duty of everyone in all circumstances, and specifically of those who are just about to die. It's a deep thought to have here. What is it that we need to do to prepare for death? Let's see what he has to say. At that moment there appeared the powerful son of Vyas. Now Vyas is the one who wrote the Vedas, who put it all down into writing. The Vedas existed for thousands of years before they were written. Tens of thousands. It is said from the beginning, when the earth was created, at that time the Vedas were given to humanity. So now they had been written down. This is 5,000 years ago. Because they could see the age of Kali was coming. People were going to have short memories. They needed to write it down. So the son of Vyas, Shukadev, appeared at that moment. He had traveled the earth disinterested in worldly things and fully satisfied within himself. He was a highly evolved being. He did not belong to any social order or status of life. And following him was a group of women and children because he appeared to be crazy. So these young kids basically were following him, sort of making fun. And he was dressed as like he was naked. He was just walking around. Right? He was 16 years old. His body was delicately formed. His eyes were beautifully wide. His arms were long, and curly hair was strewn over his beautiful face. He was naked, and the hue of his body reflected that of Krishna. He was blackish and very beautiful due to his youth. Because of the glamour of his body and his attractive smiles, he was very pleasing to everyone. The sages greeted him by rising from their seats. They bowed their heads. So they all recognized this was a being way beyond even they were. Right? So they bowed their heads before him and seated him on the seat of honor. Shukadev was then surrounded by saintly sages, just as the moon is surrounded by stars and planets. His presence was gorgeous, and he was respected by all. King Parikshit approached him with folded hands and with sweet words said, "By your mercy alone have you sanctified us, making us like unto a places of pilgrimage, all by your presence here as my guest. By your mercy, we who are but unworthy royalty become eligible to serve you. Simply by our remembering you, our houses become instantly sanctified, and what to speak of seeing you, touching you, washing your feet, and offering you a seat in our home. Just as the atheist cannot remain in the presence of God, so also the invulnerable sins of a human are immediately vanquished in your presence. Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who is very dear to to my forefathers, the sons of Pandu, has accepted me as one of those relatives just to please his great cousins and brothers." So in other words, I have been brought into this family of the Pandavas, who my forefathers, who were such great souls, but they have been very merciful to accept me as one of their relatives. This is all acts speaking from a place of humility. But here's the important part. It seems that inspired by God himself, you have voluntarily appeared here. You are the spiritual master of great saints and devotees. I therefore am begging you to show the way of perfection for all persons, especially for one who is about to die. Please let me know what a man should hear, chant, remember, and worship, and also what he should do. At this point, Shukadev, the son of Vyas, began to reply. Now his reply will be continued in our next episode. We have finished here the first canto of the Bhagavatam. It is available on Amazon if you haven't got it, Srimad Bhagavatam. And if you like to read it in detail, because I'm giving you more of a synopsis, but if you want to go into detail, it is available for you to read there. I'm now going to answer any questions, so let's see what we've got here. All right, let's take a look. And if you have anyone else hasn't written down their questions, please do so. Here's your chance. I guess had a wonderful message here from someone who calls themselves the design source, who says the flow of energy from the source through compassion seems to be the most important. Yes, you're right. Where there is compassion, you will find the greatest flow of energy, because compassion is the same vibration as spirit. Peace is the same vibration as spirit. So is love, so is joy. There is a higher level of consciousness that is beyond the ego. So you can have love that is of the world, but it's usually egoic. You can have happiness that is of the world, but is also driven by ego. In the same way, people can be compassionate. Oh, well, I'm going to do some charity. I'm going to help people out, but they've got an agenda there. When it's truly from the soul, there is no agenda. And so that's when it becomes a higher level of consciousness, and that is when there is a free flow of energy, of divine energy. Then it is experienced as something that truly touches the heart and soul. Let's see what Cindy's written here. She says, a hunter was recently attacked by a bear, shot himself in the foot in self-defense. He states next few times to hunt he will have a nightmare remembrance even though shooting him. So she's giving the example of a hunter who was recently attacked by a bear, shot himself in the foot in self-defense. He states next few times out to hunt that he will have a nightmare remembrance even though shooting himself in the foot. He plans to repeat the risk. Seems a good analogy for when we repeat some mistakes after experiencing such pain. So I think that what she's trying to get at is when we're in fear, we sometimes do things that are crazy, like shooting ourselves in the foot. We sometimes harm ourselves or harm others when we're in a state of fear. And unfortunately, when that happens, we end up creating more trouble than we set out to solve, right? So that can be the dilemma of, that's what happened in the case of Parikshit, that he was so hungry and thirsty and hangry, I guess they call it these days, right? So yeah, he was in the state where he wasn't thinking clearly. And despite all his spiritual practice, he lost it. Now, all of us will go through moments like that, where we lose it. And it's very important that we remain compassionate with ourselves and with each other. If you notice that someone in your life loses it, does something silly or stupid or unacceptable, forgive them, because really speaking, all of us are in the same boat. At some point or other, there comes a stage where we don't live up to our highest standard. We would like to, but we often fail. And rather than judging each other, rather than condemning or ostracizing or throwing each other out of the door, I never want to see you again, rather than trying to play the judgmental God archetype, it is better for us to learn compassion and learn to be okay with the fact that we all mess up from time to time, as long as we learn our lessons and try to improve ourselves. That's all we can hope for. But we are by nature flawed, and we are by nature imperfect, and we will, for certain, mess up. We all will. I will, you will, all of us will. And we hope that when we do, our community of people, our tribe of people we have surrounded ourselves with, are loving enough, are compassionate enough, are kind enough to accept us with our flaws. Let me see if there's any more questions. Doesn't look like it. Thank you all for being here. It's an honor to be serving you. We finished the first canto of the Bhagavatam, and from next time we begin to hear the most highly evolved message in the world by Shukdev. Shukdev was the son of Vyas, and this is going to be a very powerful discussion and reading. So I look forward to seeing you next week. Jai Shri Krishna. Thank you. Hare Krishna.